For context, I'm living with my sister and nieces. For this, I'll call my sister Jennifer. Now, the examples of this haunted house, well, flat. We live in a top floor flat with 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bathroom, and 1 kitchen. And it's quite small, so there's nowhere for a human to be hidden. So it can't be that. Never mind trying to get in. Anyway, I'll list the examples I have from the 5 months of living here. 1. Jennifer was cooking dinner for us all, and she looks away to grab something for not even 30 seconds. And looks back, and the pan she was cooking in had moved to a different hob that wasn't on. She wasn't using that one, and it was vigorously shaking. She then put everything down, left the kitchen, and came into the living room and explained the story, very obviously shocked. This was the first thing I had heard about anything paranormal in the house. Sometimes when she's taking my niece to school, I'll still be getting ready, as she leaves before me, so I'll be alone in the house. I'll hear footsteps in the hallway, toilet flushes, door opening and closing, and I've witnessed my room door opening a couple times by its own. No one in the house, and taps running, talking when no one's there. Every time, I'm alone. For context again, niece just turned 2, so there's balloons and a balloon archway kind of thing with craft tissue tassel on in the living room. They're still all up as the kids like to play with the balloons. Well, today, I was sat in the living room by myself and the balloons start moving and making noise. I assume it's the cat going through the balloons, as there's loads of them. So I say her name, but it doesn't stop. So I get up. And as I walk over, the balloons drop from behind the Christmas tree, as I hadn't seen them, floating. I'm obviously shocked. And these are regular balloons, not helium, so I realise it's not the cat. What's going on? But they never stop moving, so I just sit back down after about a minute. The balloons start moving again, and the tassels on the archway start pulling. So I got out my phone to record, because I couldn't believe what was going on. And as soon as I do so, everything stops for good. And I explained what had happened to my sister, and she pretty much says, stuff like that happens all the time. It's been going on for 2 years. Someone please explain this. Is this a ghost, or what? So I'm not that old, but I've had a few occurrences happen to me over the years. I have no clue what to make of them. The first I felt something weird was when I visited some friends of my grandfather. We went to this old house in a town about an hour away from where I live. When we sat in their living room, it felt like I was buried underground, like the air around me was solid. I brought it up later that day, but my grandfather said he felt nothing weird. A few years later, I sat around a campfire on a school camping trip. The adults were obviously telling us scary stories to freak us out. That was until my teacher took a picture of us. Above our heads sat a perfectly spherical thing that was pure white. It was definitely not the moon, or something else. It looked so clear and striking compared to what was around it. Wish I had the picture. I've heard voices sometimes. They've been only one word or a breath close by. I always just assumed it was my imagination, but a few months ago, I'm not so sure now. The first time, I heard a knock at my door. It sounded like the type of knock my mother would do to grab my attention. I stood up to check who knocked, just to realise that everyone in my house was just too far away from my door to have knocked. A few weeks later, I'm in class listening to an accounting lecture. While there, I suddenly hear a girl's voice say, "Can I have?" I was like, it was right next to me. The sentence also felt incomplete. I checked around me to see if anyone wanted something, just to realise that all the girls were sitting in front of me. I felt confused and eventually just went on with the work. These experiences are pretty much unrelated to each other, but maybe someone can help me understand what happened. So after many months of watching different ghost hunting channels, I decided to purchase an REM pod. If you aren't familiar with what this device is, it basically measures both EMF and temperature changes in the environment. It has different sensitivity settings, and those are measured by a metal antenna sticking out of the device. From me messing with it, it seems like even in the most sensitive setting, the EMF field will not be set off unless you're within 5 inches of it. I know what the different tones it makes represent, and the strength of contact is represented by different coloured LEDs. Now the weird part. I've been able to manipulate the REM pod on my own while being 6 feet away from it by dropping any and all said barriers. I imagine in my current mind's eye a giant white force field made of light that surrounds my home, melting away till it's gone, and it sets the REM pod off. Usually the red and purple mini LEDs and the large green LED all at the same time go off and fluctuate for a good 5 to 10 minutes. I've been able to repeat this exercise 3 times in a row, 2 different times, one of which I demonstrated in a Discord call, and he said he recorded it. I don't know if he did, but if anyone cares enough, I'm sure I can repeat it again or see if he did record it. It makes me wonder how much of these ghost investigations are being influenced by the investigators though. Bear with me. This may not be the most entertaining story, but I can assure you it is my real experience. And if anyone has experienced anything similar, please tell me. When I was in high school, I had decided to take a college course over the summer at a college in New York State for early college credits. I'm an art student, so I wanted to get some of my early art credits out of the way. Our dorm buildings were those old-looking houses with 3 floors. I was placed on the 2nd floor with 2 other students and our RA sharing a room. For context, I'm a trans person, so they put all the trans people in one dorm. I noticed something was off when I opened the closet at the end of the hallway and there was a line of salt along it. My room was next to that closet and had a mirror in it. I never liked mirrors. I've always believed in ghosts, but never thought I'd experience one. Later that day, we asked our RA about the salt line, and he told us that the building was haunted. He said that being here a week before we arrived to prepare, and had heard the closet door opening and someone walking down the hallway every night. So his solution was to put a salt line in the closet. He also took it a step further and wrote protection symbols on the back of our name tags that were stuck to the door. I believe these symbols were pagan, but don't quote me on that. They pretty much roughly translated to telling the ghost to get out and it doesn't belong there. We thought he was just messing with us because we were kids, and it was our first college experience, so we shrugged it off. That night, I was lying in bed. I had the bottom bunk, and I stared out into the dark. That's when I saw 2 red glowing circles that seemed to be in between the mirror and the window outside. It scared me a little bit, but I just decided to go sleep, trying to rationalise that it had possibly been a light from outside. The next morning, I went to check out the window. There were only trees. There wasn't a close enough house nearby to be the neighbours, and there was a road where you could hear the cars. It wasn't close enough to shine a light in. That same day, my other roommate mentioned the blinds moving. Despite it being 90 degrees in the middle of the summer, no wind, and our fans were off, the blinds moved on their own. Fast forward to Wednesday, and the whole class took a trip down to a haunted theatre for a tour. I thought this was so cool, so I recorded every room and everything the guide said on the tour. I've always been interested in this sort of thing and was hoping I'd catch a ghost on camera. That night, I was uploading all of the videos into a Windows Movie Maker file. I planned on uploading the whole thing unwatched and unedited to see if anyone saw anything. This took me hours, and I was still doing it once 2:30 AM rolled around. While I was uploading the videos into the file, I heard what sounded like a bus stopping outside and leaving. It was that sort of hiss that a bus makes when it stops. I thought nothing of it, as you often hear cars all night, but the sound returned. The sound got louder and louder to a point where I felt like something was wrong. I wasn't sure what else could make this loud hiss sound, so I thought, since the house was old, maybe it was a gas leak or something. I should alert my RA. My glasses were just out of reach, so I had to get off my bed to get them. The second my feet hit the floor, the hissing stopped, and I felt this presence, a numb feeling, kind of like when your foot falls asleep, but without the pain, against the back of my legs. This scared the crap out of me, so I hopped in bed until I had the courage to wake up my roommate. I crawled in bed with her and began feeling the same pressure and numbness on my lower back. I laid there terrified until about 4 a.m. when the pressure stopped and I was able to crawl back in my bed and go to sleep. From that point, I was absolutely terrified of being alone, and I got to the point where my RA pulled me aside and told me to get over it because one day I'll be alone. In the third week, it seemed like I would end up by myself, so I convinced the RAs to allow me to room with one of the girls upstairs. From that point on, I had zero issues, because though we knew the house was haunted, the girl I roomed with had been raised to respect spirits, and would often ask before entering the room and thank the spirits for allowing them into the space. This is a behaviour that I adopted as well, and it's much more peaceful in our room. The first sighting? This is not really a sighting, but an experience which is. In the corner of our dining room is an old wooden cabinet that we have things like glasses and memories inside. One early morning, we were packing to go on holiday, and we opened the cabinet for some reason, and a glass flew out at us. There were no glasses at the edge. The next one with the cabinet is we were having dinner a couple of weeks later, and the largest elephant ornament was 1 foot away from falling off the top. We thought it was due to someone jumping, but it was the largest and heaviest thing on there. You could see the skid marks on the dust after you lifted the elephant up, meaning something had moved it. The second and scariest sighting, same house, nothing different. My parents were on holiday and my sister was in bed. Just me downstairs. I looked at my second monitor as I was playing on my PC, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a dark, tall figure walk from the cabinet to the kitchen. Me, being an idiot, told my friend, "1 sec," and I ran to the kitchen. There was nothing. A week later, I told my family, and my sister responded, "Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times." And my dad said once he was in the living room and saw it clear as day, walk opposite him, and match the description I gave when I hadn't told them what it looked like. Spooky. I was visiting my ex who lived in a super old house. It had been a hotel, brothel, store and a funeral home in its former life. At this point, it's a home that looks so beautiful, you could only see the beautiful architecture and grand wallpaper as they used to be. Instead, the house looks as if it's been forgotten for some time. Dust and cobwebs are visible on every surface, but especially on the deep mahogany carved trim that encircled every room and sometimes protruded into elaborate carvings of guardian protectors. It was unnerving to be in this home at any time. The hair on the back of your neck would stand every time you switched rooms, as you would walked in on something that couldn't be seen. That feeling is something you can get used to though. It's a feeling that fades quickly and grows comfortable after a while. This was a feeling that you didn't mind because it didn't trigger any emotion. It was just more of a reminder that Some people are unseen. At night, the house was a different story. Not often, but some lights in the house after the sunset felt different. It was filled with tension. You could feel the hair on your neck stand, but the energy of someone being there is much different. This feeling causes goosebumps. It's uncomfortable, tension-filled and chilling. This feeling doesn't fade and sometimes return just from mentions of the stories I encountered. Not lasting as long as before, but definitely there. Tonight, I went over because my boyfriend's parents and siblings had gone out of town and needed us to dog sit. We hung around the house and watched TV. That night, we decided we would travel to the upstairs back hall, just to scare ourselves. The house felt quieter than normal that day. We were worried we might not see anything in the back hall, like all of the last spirits were on vacation. That night, it changed. Everyone knows this house is haunted. There's no doubt. But as you climb the stairs to the second story, you're met with another level of paranormal. Almost constantly, you hear things that don't make sense. You feel that negative tension in the air, and you catch things out of the corner of your eye that you can't find reasoning for. To add a little extra spice, the upstairs had lost all of its electricity several years prior. Instead, they had extension cords running to the 3 main bedrooms. The upstairs is split into 2 parts. One of the parts is at the top of the staircase. It opens to 3 main bedrooms, each with a giant door made of solid wood, and sharing the same grand crown moulding as the downstairs. Immediately to the left of the staircase was another identical door. This door leads to a hallway. The hallway has a few rooms and a bathroom. Room numbers still grace the front of each door to let hotel guests know which room would be accommodating them for the evening. As the sun went down, we got excited to go exploring and maybe dig up some trouble. Live for the adrenaline of it, get a little spooking. As we went up the stairs, things felt different. Even in the dark, nothing was happening. Just like earlier in the day, the house was quiet. It just felt like we were in any old house. No goosebumps, no presence of another, no noise. As we turned the knob and opened the door to the back hallway, it changed immediately. Suddenly, all around us was a presence of darkness and a feeling of terror. We immediately had the same thought. No. We closed the door and almost immediately the air cleared of the terrible feeling it had presented just moments earlier. Since the house felt so calm, we decided to spend some time in my boyfriend's bedroom upstairs. As we lay there watching a movie, the lights flickered. Not uncommon because of the extension cord fire hazard that ran from the living room and up the stairs. The flicker brought with us that terrible presence we had felt, opening the back hallway door, rushing back to us. As we glanced at each other in terror, the lights flickered one more, and a loud crash came from outside the door, and repetitive beats like a toddler running pounded loudly in the hallway, directly outside of the room. Only 5 or 6 steps, but incredibly loud. As soon as the pounding footfalls stopped, the air changed to normal again. We sat catching our breath together for what seemed like forever. Neither of us said a word. When we did speak, we decided we should leave for the night. The dog would be fine until morning. Upon opening the door to his bedroom to get out of the house, we heard a crunch. Lifting his shoe, we noticed that my ex had just stepped in broken glass. Upon further inspection, we realised it wasn't just broken glass. It was broken Christmas bulbs. These are special ornaments his mum puts up every year and keeps in special ornament totes with locking lids to prevent breakage. Those totes are behind a closed door, down a hallway and inside a room that also had a closed door away from where they now lay at our feet. We left. When I was 14, in 1994, my bedroom was in the attic of a 100-year-old house. My 7-year-old sister and parents had bedrooms on the second floor, and the main floor was mostly open with a cute 40s-style kitchen. One day I was in my room when one of the kids visiting the second floor had accidentally made his way up into my room. He was quiet and just looked at me. This happened often, so I directed him back down the stairs to the second floor. An hour or so later, I walked downstairs to talk to my mom and casually asked where the kids went. She seemed confused and said that my sister wasn't home today and no kids were visiting. I walked up and down the stairs a few times, checked all the closets, and figured the kid must have left. Mom assured me she's been sitting between the only 2 doors of the house, and no kids visited. I was sure I saw a kid, but it would have been hard to sneak around it twice, especially with the loud screen doors. That night before dinner, I'm skimming through the local paper. Every day they would publish anniversaries of local stories from 5, 10, 20, 50, or even 100 years ago. When I got to the story about 50 years ago, it told a story about a kid who died when a bomb got loose from the World War II armory across the street and accidentally detonated in our kitchen. I look around and noticed how our kitchen is from the 40s. Then I remember how I saw this kid earlier in the day, and it freaked me out. Was he a ghost kid? Even without the ghost kid, it's a weird story, but what if he was a ghost kid? We moved away from that house, and I always wondered about the ghost kid. So here's where it really gets weird. When I moved in with a roommate 5 years later, we're telling stories back and forth one night and eventually got around to ghost stories, and I told him about the ghost kid. He says, "Was it at 44 Front Avenue East?" Yes. That's my Uncle Bobby. He hit it with an ice pick. This story has been in my head for a while, but it's also been over 5 years since this happened. It was 2015 and I was 12 years old, in a suburban town in Pennsylvania. I lived on top of a cliff or hill, and my neighbour at that time, we'll call her A, was 11 and a grade under me. Now I was never close to my family, so I never really knew the pain of losing a daily member at this point. But my neighbour had lost her grandmother at this point in time. She spent a couple of days with her family, and once she came home, she was still a mess. I, doing the only thing I knew how to do when people were upset, found her, and as soon as she came home and hugged her. After this, we hung out all the time and decided we wanted to hang out all night because why not? Her brother was staying at his other friend's house as his own coping mechanism. So we took over his bedroom, with his permission. Because he had a queen bed, and so we could share a bed. I'll skip over all the tween girl shit we did, because it's not important. Where the weird shit is at around midnight. We ended our night watching South Park on her laptop. A fell asleep during the last episode we were watching. I finished the episode and put her laptop on the floor, and just turned over to go to sleep. Now this is where this gets really hard to explain, so I'm going to write what happened in list order of times. Midnight, I finished watching the South Park episode and went to sleep. 12:30. A stirs quite hard in bed. 1 to 1:15 a.m. A stirs concerningly hard in her sleep, to the point where I make sure she's okay, and also starts to make weird noises. Like when a baby tried to learn to talk for the first time, but just couldn't figure out how to make the words. 1:30 a.m. A stirs so hard in her sleep that she ends up laying with her head at my feet, and her feet at my head. And she's doing the weird mumble or growl thing even louder, and it really doesn't sound like her. 2 a.m. She continues stirring and making weird noises. 2:30 a.m. She starts making the noises again and stirs more and more. She eventually sat up in bed and sat up completely straight, turning her head out towards the front of the bed. Her shoulders completely relax and she says, "But I didn't mean to," in a tone that makes it sound like she was getting scolded. She lays down while swinging her legs completely straight out and laying down perfectly as if someone was placing down a doll. I, freaking the fuck out, turned to look to see what she was looking at. When I turned, I saw a figure of a woman that was just pure white. I didn't get a long enough look to be able to make out features, but I saw something. Now, this figure thing was not in front of a window, mirror, or any sort of light. The street lamps were not LEDs at this point, they were actually a yellow colour. I also only got to see this figure for about half a second. 2:37 a.m. I pack my shit up and go home. As I'm going home, I feel like I'm being stared at from all corners, behind and in front of me, as I walk on the road. I kept checking behind me, and obviously there was nothing to the eye, though I felt like there was. The house I lived in had a concrete slab walkway thing that led up to my front door. As I'm walking out of this walkway, I hear what sounds like heavy boots walking behind me. I remember pausing and trying to let my brain figure out if it was my steps or something else. As I walk faster, so does the sound of the steps behind me. Once I got to my door, they stopped. The next day, I told my neighbour about this, and there was no explanation for this experience. My family and friends told me that I saw nothing. What I heard was her simply sleep-talking, even though she had no prior experience with it, and also that her stirring was just normal. A few weeks after this happened, I spoke to A again, and her exact sentence to bring it up again was, "Oh yeah, it was my grandma. She visits me in my sleep now." Now that is kind of explained. Let's get back to the feeling of being watched while crossing the road. This is also where the cliff I lived on comes in. Now, if there are people who don't know, Pennsylvania is the state of coal, and there's a lot of coal mining, obviously. After the whole seeing my friend's dead grandma ordeal, we were sitting around the fire talking about why our parents decided to live where we lived. So we simply asked them, and one thing that really sticks out in the conversation is the risk factor of living where we lived. Underneath all our houses are old mining tunnels that could collapse at any minute. There's not a lot of information on the story, but I'm pretty sure something happened, and there was an accident or people got sick, but something happened and it was not good. So that could feel like being watched while walking. Maybe there was just making sure I got home safe. I've never had an experience like that ever since that moment. I'm now 18 and still can't make sense of the situation and also no longer talk to A. It's like a weird unclosed chapter of my life. Made up of 44-year-old Bobby Jameson, his 40-year-old wife Sherilyn Jameson, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison, the Jameson family appeared to be living a happy life, but they were going through a rough patch. Bobby was suffering from chronic back pain, and his wife Sherilyn was bipolar. As she often failed to take her medications, she was going through severe depression. Bobby believed that their house was haunted by spirits that lived on their roof. As a result, Bobby called their pastor Gary on multiple occasions and asked him where he could get special bullets to shoot these spirits. To add on, the Jameson family owned a storage container, which was pretty popular in their current neighbourhood, as Sherilyn painted creepy wordings on it. Because of this general creepiness around the family, the neighbours avoided them on all possible occasions. Thinking that their house was the reason behind that bad phase of life, the Jameson family decided to move out of their house in Eufaula, Oklahoma, and settle down somewhere else. However, the family did not intend to move to another house. Instead, they wanted to purchase a plot of land and then build their own house on it. Until they built their dream home, the family decided to place their storage container in their new plot of land and live on it. Disappearance. On the 8th of October 2009, the Jameson family loaded up their truck and, along with their pet dog, Maisie, drove away to the land plot they were planning to purchase in Red Oak. Unfortunately, this would become the last time they would be seen alive. As it was quite normal for the Jameson to disappear for days to get away from the city life, their relatives and friends did not think much about it when they didn't hear from them. Also, as Bobby and Sherilyn had already informed Madison's school that they'd be changing a school as they were moving, no concerns were raised when Madison did not attend the classes. On 16th of October 2009, two hunters were walking around in the Paranormal Mountains, and they found a truck on a cleared piece of land. As finding vehicles in this area was uncommon, they walked up to the truck hoping to find its owner. But when they reached it, they noticed there was no one inside it except an exhausted dog. The windows of the truck were rolled up and its doors were locked. With no one around, the hunters called the police. When the police arrived, they figured out that it was the Jamesons' truck and the dog inside it was their pet dog Maisie. With Maisie seemingly passed out, the police broke the window of the truck and rescued her. As it appeared as if Maisie had been locked inside the truck for at least a few days, the police started inspecting the truck. Inside it, they found Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, their ID cards, their mobile phones, a GPS system, and a bank bag filled with $32,000 in cash. Also, they found an 11-page letter that Sherilyn had written to Bobby. The letter was filled with hate, and it accused Bobby of being a hermit. The police did an initial search of the area, looking for the Jameson family, but they couldn't find them. They decided to use the previous GPS locations of their mobile phones to get an insight into where they went. The GPS locations revealed that the cell phones had gone up the nearby hill, stayed there for around 15 minutes, and came back down to the truck. Hence, the police walked up the hill in search of the family. But all they could find were Madison's footprints. The footprints of her parents, however, were nowhere to be seen, and this led the police into checking their mobile phones. In one of their phones, the police found a recently taken photograph of Madison, and it was taken at the top of the nearby hill. In this photograph, Madison appeared to be extremely unhappy. Thus, confirming that the family had walked up the hill, the police launched an extensive search with over 400 people volunteering in it. The search was eventually called off as no clues about the Jameson family were found. To get a better understanding of their disappearance, the footage of the surveillance system in their house was checked. The footage showed the couple loading their truck just before driving away. However, the couple seemed to be in a trance-like state while loading the truck. They walked multiple times between the house and the truck, and at times, they walked from the house to the truck with nothing in their hand. Not speaking to each other, they occasionally stopped and stared at something at a distance for a brief moment of time. With no new leads to work on, the case became cold, and what happened to the family remained unknown until 3 skeletons were found 4 years later. Discovery. In November of 2013, while 2 hunters were walking in a section of the Paranormal Mountains, which was almost 5 kilometers away from the area where the Jamesons' truck was found, they found the skeletal remains of 3 bodies lying face down side by side. Seeing that 2 of them belonged to adults and the other belonged to a child, it was immediately speculated to be that of the missing Jameson family. Almost 8 months later, the forensic confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to the Jameson family. The cause and time of death, however, couldn't be determined due to the timely decay of the remains. A small hole was found on the back of Bobby's skull, and a few other small holes were found on the other bones. Thus, the reason behind their disappearance and death unknown, what really happened to the Jameson family, remains a mystery. Theories. With the actual circumstances shrouded in obscurity, several theories about the family's mysterious death emerged. Lost in the woods. There is a possibility that the family ventured into the nearby forests, got lost inside, and eventually died trying to find their way out. But this is highly unlikely, as during the days in which they apparently went missing, the temperature never dropped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even at night. Although this area experienced rain then, it wasn't that strong. Hence, the probability of the family dying because of getting lost in the woods is quite less, but it could still have been possible. Homicide and suicide. Considering the fact that Sherilyn was bipolar and the hate that her 11-page letter in the car carried, there is a possibility that she became euphoric and killed her family before killing herself. However, her friends and relatives claimed that she would never harm her child. Also, considering the fact that the family were planning to settle down in this new place of land, this possibility is highly unlikely, but still possible. Murder. Bobby's relationship with his father was not particularly great. Bobby had, in fact, petitioned a protective order against his father, who would threaten to kill them twice. But when the Jameson family went missing, Bobby's father was actually in hospital, and he died 2 months later. This made him physically and mentally incapable of killing his son and his family. After the bodies of the Jameson family were discovered, one of Sherilyn's friends named Nikki received an anonymous phone call from a woman. She claimed that she used to be part of a white supremacist cult, and in their hit list, she remembered seeing the name of the Jameson family. Before she could ask any more questions, the call disconnected, and the call couldn't be traced. Also, considering the fact that a satanic Bible was found in the Jamesons' house, and the lump sum of money that was found in their truck, there is a possibility that they were lured into a cult and then murdered. Born on 12th of November 1969, Johnny Gosch was the only son of John and Noreen Gosch. His parents took excellent care of him, only to see their worst nightmare unfold 13 years later, when Johnny disappeared in unexpected and obscure circumstances. Johnny's case allegedly involves prostitution, paedophilia, and a human trafficking ring. Johnny's disappearance. On 15th of September 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch left his house in the suburb of West Des Moines at around 5:45 a.m. to deliver the Des Moines Register's Sunday paper to the people of his locality. He usually woke his father up before leaving the house to help him with his delivery rounds, but that day he left the house all alone with only Gretchen, the house's miniature dachshund, accompanying him. Dressed up in a white sweatshirt with Kim's Academy printed on the back, sweatpants and blue rubber flip-flops, he took with him a yellow paper bag and a red wagon, which he always used to carry the papers. However, Johnny was not able to deliver the papers that day. As a result, at around 7 a.m, his mother Noreen got a call from a neighbour who complained about not receiving their newspaper. Alarmed by this, his father John left the house to investigate. Approximately 2 blocks away, he found Johnny's red wagon with Gretchen and all the undelivered newspapers in it. John rushed back to the house and, along with Noreen, informed the police. But because of the police policy back then, Johnny could be classified as missing only after 72 hours. Initial investigation. The initial finding of the police was that the young boy had run away from his parents, but his parents strongly objected to it and suggested that Johnny had been kidnapped. However, they were not able to establish a strong motive behind it. Thus, to gather more information, John and Noreen started to do their own investigation. Thankfully, they got quite a few input from witnesses who saw him just before his disappearance. On the dreaded September morning in which Johnny disappeared, his fellow paperboys had seen him at the paper drop, picking up his share of newspapers. Mike, who was one of Johnny's fellow paperboys, saw a blue Ford Fairmont car approach Johnny. The engine of the car turned off, and the man driving it opened its door, swinging his feet out onto the platform on which the boys were assembling. He asked Johnny where 86th Street was, but Johnny gave him a completely incoherent answer. He told the man that his papers were loaded in his wagon. "I'm scared. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to head home," he added. As Johnny started walking away, the car also started to leave. But before driving away, the mysterious man flickered his light thrice. It tipped as if he was giving out a signal, as a tall man walked out of a space between two buildings and started following Johnny along 42nd Street to Marcourt Lane. At the same time, a man named Smith was woken by the sound of a car door slamming shut. When he sat up on his bed and peeked through a nearby window, he saw a black and silver car break the stop signal and make a left turn. A couple of other residents saw Johnny talking to a strange-looking man in a blue car, whose number plate was from Warren County, Iowa. After Noreen and John gave the police the information they had gathered, the police began scouring the entire area. They even did a door-to-door canvass of the neighbourhood to find clues, but they found nothing. It appeared as if the boy had just vanished, and that is exactly what the police officer in charge of the case said in his pronouncement. With the police not doing much to solve the case, Noreen sought the help of two private investigators named Jim and Ted, who followed up on the leads that were never pursued by the police. What they found horrified Noreen. Johnny was supposedly kidnapped to be used in a global paedophile and prostitution ring. In March of 1983, roughly 6 months after Johnny's disappearance, a woman from Oklahoma claimed that she was approached by a young boy in the parking lot of a local store. He kept screaming, "I'm Johnny Gosh, I've been kidnapped." But before she could do anything, 2 men grabbed him and took him away. They were never seen again. Over the following years, more evidence was found. Gosh received a dollar bill with a handwritten note on it, and it read, "I am alive, Johnny Gosh." Noreen confirmed that it was indeed her son's handwriting. Also, in Denver, "Johnny Gosh was here" was written on the restroom wall of a public eatery, and whether it was real or not was hard to decide. Another boy goes missing. After the disappearance of another 13-year-old boy named Eugene on 12th of August 1984, Noreen gained the support of a diary company in Des Moines. Eugene went missing while he was delivering newspapers on the south side of Des Moines. With the police claiming that the cases had no connection, Noreen claimed that she knew about the abduction a few months before it happened. According to her, a private investigator who was searching for her son told her that the next kidnapping would take place on the second weekend of August 1984, and it would be a paperboy from the south side of Des Moines. After Eugene's disappearance, his relative, who was working at Anderson and Erickson Diary, reached out to the company's president. To help find the boys, he agreed to put their photos and details on the sides of the half-gallon milk cans the dairy made. It was later followed by the Prairie Farms dairy as well. Despite the massive reach it gave, no information about their disappearance was found. A new claim. In 1989, Noreen met a 21-year-old man named Paul, who was also a victim of the prostitution ring that apparently captured Johnny. He told her that the underage prostitution ring was run by Lawrence E. King Jr., a prominent Republican Party activist and businessman. He also claimed that other high-level US politicians were involved in it. According to him, they were a cult of devil worshippers who were involved in the mutilation, sacrifice, and cannibalism of children. Paul told Noreen that he had met Johnny while he was stuck in the prostitution den. He told her details about Johnny which were never publicised, and this included a scar on the tongue. However, the FBI and the police did not consider him as credible evidence, and they didn't even interview him. Also, separate state and federal grand juries ruled out the prostitution ring as a carefully crafted hoax. But according to Noreen, the claims were dismissed just because of the high-profile names that were involved. Noreen claims to have seen Johnny again. In the early hours of March of 1997, two young men appeared on the doorstep of Noreen's Iowa apartment. After waking up from sleep because of the knock, she walked towards the main door and peeked through to see who it was. As the faces were unfamiliar, she asked who it was, and her voice answered, "It's me, Johnny. Can I come in?" She immediately opened the door and let the men in. After entering the house, the young man who'd claimed to be Johnny opened up his shirt and showed her a unique birthmark on his chest to confirm his identity. Noreen understood that her son had grown into a young man. After a brief conversation with his mother, the young man left. According to Noreen, her son told her that he was indeed kidnapped by the members of a paedophilic crime ring. He had recently escaped from them and was keeping a low profile to avoid getting abducted again. He told her that he was still in great danger and thus would not visit her again. Asking his mother to bring his captors to justice, Johnny apparently left. Later, Noreen went to the FBI and had them create a sketch of how her adult son, but with a lack of evidence to suggest that Johnny was abducted by the members of a paedophilic ring, made them question if he was still alive. There's a possibility of Noreen hallucinating or someone playing a prank on the grieving woman, but it's hard to come up with a convincing conclusion. Disturbing photographs. On September 1st, 2006, Noreen found a mysterious envelope on her doorstep. Inside the envelope were 3 chilling photos. In these photos were 3 young boys who were tied up and gagged, and one of these boys resembled Johnny. Believing that the photos were authentic, she took them to the police department, but with a Florida law enforcement officer claiming that he had investigated one of these photos a few years before Johnny's disappearance. All 3 boys in this photograph were identified, and it was determined that they willingly posed for it. Assuming that the other 2 photos were related to this one, the police concluded that it was just a bad prank. Noreen, however, asserted that the boy in the photo was her son himself, but the police never took her seriously. With Noreen still insisting that her son was abducted to satisfy paedophiles, and the police continually denying it, what actually happened to Johnny remains a mystery. In December of 1803, the residents of Hammersmith, a small town located on the northern banks of the River Thames, started facing a ghostly problem. They started reporting petrifying encounters with a phantom that haunted the lanes, churchyards, and fields of the town, with some witnesses describing it as a white hooded figure, and others claiming it to be in the skin of a beast. One concordant thing about the ghostly figure was the terror it inflicted upon its victims. It struck so much terror in the minds of the residents that they tried their best to not go out of their homes after 5 p.m. Ghost attacks. On 15th of December 1803, while Thomas Groom, a brewer's servant, was walking through St. Paul's churchyard, With a fellow servant at around 9 p.m, he encountered this ghostly figure. According to his own account, something came from the tombstone behind him and caught him by the throat. It twisted him around, but he did not see anything in front of him. He tried pushing it away with a fist, and while doing so, he felt something that resembled a great coat. This incident gave Thomas a terrible fever, from which he very lately recovered. On 29th of December, 1803, while William Girdler, the private watchman who was appointed by residents of the town, was on his nightly rounds, he reported seeing a tall, whitish figure. When he walked towards it to get a better look, he noticed that it was a person who had covered himself up with a white cloth. Underneath the cloth, he wore a dark coat with metal buttons. William tried nabbing him, but the person fled into darkness. Even with the dawn of the new year, the attacks of the ghostly figure never stopped. At the beginning of January 1804, the ghost attacked 2 women. With one elderly and the other pregnant, the shock caused by the terrorizing encounter killed them both. One night in the same month, while a driver of a coach was travelling on a remote lane in the town, he started hearing a strange rustling sound. When he looked around to see what was causing the sound, he saw a strange white figure gliding over the nearby meadows parallel to him. As it got closer and closer, he noted that it had bladders on different parts of its body. Completely terrified, the driver jumped out of his carriage and ran back to the town, leaving behind his passengers and his horses. When he returned back with over a dozen residents by his side, he found the traces cut and the horses grazing in a nearby field. The murder. Following this event, a clergyman and a resident of the town offered a reward to anyone who could capture the ghost. With half of the residents considering this ghost a real one, and the other half considering it as a man acting as a ghost, groups of young men armed with guns began roaming the lanes and fields of the town by night to put an end to the troubling ghost. One of these men was a 29-year-old excise officer called Francis Smith. On 3rd of January 1804, armed himself up and headed out to hunt for the ghost at around 10:30 p.m. When watchman William met him at the corner of Black Lion Lane, Smith told him that he was out in search of the ghost. After the meet-up, William continued on his rounds, and Smith plunged into the darkness to continue on his hunt. At the same time, a bricklayer named Thomas Millwood was going to his house from his mother's house, and he was still clad in his work clothes, which were completely white. Because of his work clothes, he had already been mistaken for the ghost twice, and even this time, he was mistaken for a ghost by Smith. Thinking Millwood was the ghost, Smith shot him. With a bullet put through his jaw, Millwood met his demise, and his body was taken to the Black Lion Inn. Smith acknowledged the crime he had committed, and he turned himself in. Despite Smith claiming that it was an accident, and he only killed Millwood because he resembled a ghost, he was sentenced to death on 6th of January 1804, but his sentence was changed just in a few days' time. On the 24th of January 1804, he was pardoned by the king himself on condition he served 1 year in prison. The ghostly attacks pause and resume. By the time of Smith's trial, one of the culprits behind the haunting was found. It was discovered that a shoemaker named John Graham had a habit of disguising himself as a ghost. He was a religiously inclined man who was the principal singer in the chapel. This made him the last guy to be suspected as the man behind the haunting. According to Graham, he did it to take revenge on his apprentices after they scared his children by telling them ghost stories. However, Graham was adamant that he went out dressed up as a ghost only once. This was accepted by the community, and no further action was taken by him. Following this incident, the ghost stopped appearing and life in town started returning to normal. With the fear slowly dissipating, more and more people started venturing into the dark, and the Hammersmith ghost eventually became a distant memory. But the ghost would come back to haunt them 2 decades later. On 3rd of December 1824, the town residents were greeted by the headline, "A New Hammersmith Ghost." In their newspapers, in the lanes and roads of the town, a tall white figure started crossing paths with females, only to magically disappear later. One night, while a girl was returning home after her work in Angel Public House, a tall white figure appeared in front of her and started chasing her. The poor girl was so scared by this that she was subject to dangerous fits. A few nights later, when a hard-working man was returning home from work, the ghost jumped on his back, threw him to the ground, and then vanished. The man was left with a broken arm. The ghost attacked its third victim a few days later. This time, it was a woman whose clothes were torn to pieces. The woman was found unconscious on the road with multiple deep scratches on her body. On 15th of February 1825, the true identity of the ghost was revealed. When the ghost tried attacking a man named Worsley, he got hold of it. It was revealed that it was not a ghost, but a farmer named John Benjamin, who was pulling up the ghostly antics. After he was caught, the sightings of the ghost stopped. So, were all of the ghosts of Hammersmith merely dressed up human beings? The headline of the newspaper published on 29th of July 1955 says no. Claims of a real ghost. The newspaper article told a story that was not published until then. In 1803, a man slit his throat open and died right next to the church. He was buried in the churchyard. Back then, it was believed by the locals that it was the ghost of this man that was haunting the town. The person who shared this information with the newspaper claimed that his great-grandmother had seen a tall white figure rise from the tombstone of the man's grave. She was claiming that it had flaming eyes and it chased her until she fainted. When she woke up, the ghost was already gone. 2 days later, the poor woman died because of fear. The woman's husband, i.e. the anonymous person's great-grandfather, apparently saw the ghost on the first full moon night in August for the last time. According to the article, the ghost was rumoured to appear every 50 years on the first full moon night of August. According to a paranormal investigator named Chris Farman, the claims became true. On 5th of August 1955, which was the first full moon night of August, Chris Farman and 17 other paranormal investigators witnessed a white figure rise out of the dead man's tomb in the middle of the night. The figure did not seem to have legs, and it appeared as if it was hovering over the floor. After drifting around the churchyard for some time, it moved back to its tomb and disappeared. Conclusion. In 2005, the next time the ghost was supposed to appear, several newspapers tried to build up anticipation for the occasion, but it did not catch public attention as it did in 1955. Thus, not much information about the events of 2005 is known, and to confirm if the ghost is true or not, one has to wait until 2055. So, was Hammersmith haunted by a real ghost, or a man dressed up like a ghost? The answer remains a mystery. On the morning of 15th of June 2005, a team of paramedics was called to the Holy Trinity Monastery in Tanacu, a small remote village situated amidst the hills and forests of eastern Romania. When they arrived, they saw the lifeless body of a young woman who was dressed up as a nun and laid on a temporary cross. They were not aware of the fact that the 23-year-old woman had just been through a 3-day-long exorcism led by Father Daniel Petrocorrigian, who, with the assistance of 4 nuns of the monastery, had attempted to drive out a demon that he claimed had possessed her. The name of this dead woman was Marisha Arena Konichi, and her exorcism turned out to become one of the most publicised and highly debated instances of exorcism in the 21st century. The exorcism was indeed a terrifying battle for Arena, but having lived through a long string of battles with separation, abuse and inner demons, it was only her last one. Irina moves into the monastery. Irina was born in 1981 to a poor unmarried couple from Vaslui County in eastern Romania. At only 3 years old, she witnessed her father, a troubled brawler, hang himself from a beam of the house, after which her mother was deemed financially unfit to take care of her and her 2 siblings. Thus, she and her younger brother Vasil were left under the care of an extremely corrupt orphanage owned by the state. While growing up, they suffered unspeakable abuse at the hands of those entrusted to be their caregivers, but this, by all accounts, did not hinder Irina's physical and psychological development. Similar to most of the other girls raised in Romanian orphanages at that time, she was tough, hard-working, and wary of men. She took self-defense classes at a young age and developed a passion for karate, which she often used to protect her friends. Also, she spoke with a deep, intimidating voice and only felt comfortable dressed in sportswear. Her limited education gave her limited options for her future, and so when she sought employment when she was 19 years old, she worked as a nanny in Germany. While away from her hometown, Irina was in close touch with her brother and her best friend from the orphanage, Paraskiva. Wanting to escape her turbulent past, Paraskiva joined the Order of the Holy Trinity Monastery of Tanaku in 2003. In her letters to Irina, she wrote about Father Daniel Petru Korogian, the abbot of the monastery, whom she claimed was a great man. She said that she felt relieved after confessing her sins to him, promising that it would give her the peace and relief she had always desired. She invited Irina to the monastery for confession and Holy Communion. Thus, at the beginning of April 2005, Irina and her brother visited Sister Paraskiva with plans to return to Germany in June of the same year. For Father Korogian, their visit was a blessing. With the abbey still under construction, he started counting on their help at the monastery. Story of Father Korogian. Before becoming a priest, Father Korogian was pursuing religious studies at the University of Iasi. While he was still studying, he was recruited by a businessman from his hometown for building the Holy Trinity Monastery. The construction commenced in the year 2000, the same year in which Father Korogian was hastily ordained by the local bishop before finishing his religious studies. This raised a lot of eyebrows, as according to the laws of the Orthodox Church, one has to be a graduate of religious studies before ordination. Unlike the Catholic Church, exorcisms in the Orthodox Church can be performed without seeking approval from the higher ranks. Thus, with the decision left to their own discretion, exorcisms were quite common in eastern Romania, and they were performed by bishops and priests. Although the Orthodox Church frowned upon public exorcisms, they were habitually performed by priests during service. The priests who performed them were often regarded as religious celebrities. Inspired by these priests, Father Korogian, who was given the right to exorcism along with his ordination, started performing his own devil-banishing service at the monasteries. In 2003, Father Korogian ran into a problem with the diocese because the county bishop constantly refused to bless the church in the monastery, as the conventional iconography was not painted on its walls. Considering the blessing of the bishop only a formality, he continued to hold a service inside the church for the parishioners. The nuns who were devout to him are now his new guests, Irina and her brother. Backstory. Irina was elated to be reunited with her best friend and spent the following days attending service, doing chores, and reminiscing. Allured by the secure and peaceful life the monastery provided, Irina slowly started to consider staying there. But little did she know, it was only the calm before the storm. Pressured by Sister Paraskiva, Irina decided to confess her sins on the 8th of April. Having a rough idea about the trauma the young woman had been through, Father Corrigian helped her ease into the confession by asking her up first about her life in Germany. After exhausting this topic, Irina is said to have become distressed, and she started retreating. Seeing her lost in her own thoughts, Father Corrigian advised her to leave Germany and settle somewhere close to the monastery. After asking her a few more questions, he gave her his blessing and penance, which she promised to complete before her Holy Communion, which was scheduled for the next day. So, the next morning, she joined the sisters at Mass to receive her Holy Communion. Dressed up in a skirt and blouse with a scarf covering her head, she felt extremely uncomfortable abandoning her usual clothes, but the excitement of receiving her Holy Communion overshadowed it. After the communion, she felt that something had allegedly changed inside of her. She felt light as she walked gently around the monastery, humming a song to herself which, according to her own account, filled her being. Later that evening, the nuns of the monastery started beating the semitron before the beginning of the evening prayers, and its rhythm pulled Irina towards the church. This seemed to be a mystifying experience for the young woman, but soon turned into an unsettling one, as she suddenly started feeling a sense of dread within her. Just before she almost entered the church, she started feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the skirt she was wearing. So, she turned around and started walking back to change into her regular attire. On her way, she stopped by some of the nuns who needed her help, but she yelled at them uncharacteristically and continued walking back. She was again stopped by Sister Nicolita, the Mother Superior, who attempted to appease her, but she continued to walk away, mumbling to herself. When Sister Nicolita turned her attention away from her, Irina snuck behind her back and started making rude remarks and obscene gestures. Dumbfounded by her actions, Sister Nicolita summoned Sister Paraskiva, which made Irina flee. After the evening prayers concluded, she returned to the church entrance dressed in jeans and started hopping around behind the sisters, mimicking their walks and yelling profanities at them. According to Sister Paraskiva, she looked nothing like her original self, and every time she heard the name of Jesus, she reacted badly. Upon seeing her behaviour, Father Corrigian concluded that she must have kept something from him during confession, which had thus compromised her Holy Communion. So, concerned for his penitent, he asked Sister Paraskiva to bring Irina to him for a second confession. What followed was a rather unconventional confession, where Sister Paraskiva confessed Irina's sins instead of her. As Paraskiva revealed the concealed and traumatic past of Irina's life, she started mimicking her and nodding dramatically. Father Corrigian hoped that his penitent's condition would improve after the second confession, but right after the confession, Irina dropped to the ground and began squirming, one moment yelling that she wanted to leave the abbey, while in the very next moment pleading with the nuns to let her stay. She started growing extremely reckless and started hurting herself. Shocked by what they were seeing, Father Corrigian and Sister Nicolita called for an ambulance, but as they did not get a proper response, they tied her up with a rope and drove her to the Vaslui County Hospital. Irina was diagnosed with delusional hallucinatory flush, exhibiting psychomotor agitation and onset of major psychosis. She was later transferred to the psychiatric ward, where due to her violent outbursts, she had to be restrained and kept under medicated sleep. There, Irina was diagnosed with disorganized schizophrenia, which by all accounts was a diagnosis meant only to facilitate the prescription of antipsychotic medication. Within 4 days on such medication, her health worsened and she was once again transferred to the intensive care unit. 12 days later, after it was concluded that she had recovered, Irina was released into the care of the Holy Trinity Monastery. During her time at the psychiatric ward, Irina often complained of hearing demonic voices, but she was never taken seriously, and these voices never stopped, despite the hospital claiming that she had recovered. When Sister Nicolita was supervising her in the monastery, she's said to have witnessed her screaming, singing, and rocking back and forth at the edge of her bed, while staring at the empty wall in front of her. According to her, Irina was demonically possessed, and she felt the shivers of hell in her presence. The exorcism. Soon, Irina made her third confession to Father Corrigian, and this time, it appeared to have worked. She was back to her original self, and Father Corrigian and the nuns of the monastery were happy about it. Inspired by her progress, Father Corrigian told Irina that they could continue taking care of her at the monastery, but that they would need more resources for her medication and accommodation, for which he asked her to yield her savings to the church. She ended up doing it only to be filled with distress later. With a huge portion of her savings gone, her tantrums returned. She started cursing the nuns of the monastery and threatened to hurt them with karate moves. While the situation worsened, and her becoming more and more violent, Father Corrigian pinned her down, tied her up, gagged her mouth with a towel, and confined her to a room. While being confined to a room for 2 full days, Irina started screaming and yelling in fear, claiming that the devil had come to take her. It was at this point Father Corrigian decided to exorcise her. So, the nuns made an extemporary cross, chained Irina to it, taped her mouth, and took her into the church to begin the exorcism ritual. According to Sister Nicolita, if they hadn't chained her to the cross, she would have killed herself or someone else. Also, one of the other sisters who were involved claimed that Irina knew that she was possessed, and she herself asked them to tie her up and help her. During the ritual, Father Corrigian tried to give her holy water and blessed bread, which she refused to take. This further enforced his belief that she was indeed possessed by the devil furthermore. After hours of relentless struggle not seeming to work, Irina was carried to the enclosed veranda of the church and placed on a quilt, which she was still tied to the cross. The entire event repeated for 2 more nights and days, before she was finally untied from the cross. On the morning of 15th of June, after Father Corrigian claimed that she was cured, Irina was untied from the cross after 3 long days, and she was too weak to even stand on her own feet. Her mouth was severely wounded, and she appeared to be completely hydrated. The nuns tried to feed her bread soaked in warm tea, but she soon became unresponsive. With her barely breathing and her pulse fast dropping, the paramedics were called. Before they arrived, the nuns prepared Irina for the hospital, as they washed her body and dressed her like a nun, and the whole time, Irina was simply limp and quiet. When the paramedics finally arrived 30 minutes later and checked Irina, they concluded that she must have died a few hours prior to their arrival. But Father Corrigian and the nuns refused this. They claimed that they had given her tea and bread only an hour before. Overwhelmed by the situation, the paramedics drove her to the hospital, and on their way, They attempted resuscitation by injecting her with adrenaline every few minutes. When they reached the hospital, it was concluded that the girl had already died. The doctor who examined her said that the young woman looked like a 60-year-old woman because of her injuries and intense dehydration. The authorities were informed about Irina's death and a criminal investigation commenced. Aftermath. Father Corrigian and the 4 nuns who helped him, Nicolita, Adina, Alina and Simona, were charged with murder, although they strongly claimed that Irina had died because of an overdose of adrenaline, which was injected into her on her way to the hospital. Father Corrigian was initially charged with aggravated murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison, while the 4 nuns were sentenced to between 5 and 8 years. But upon appeal, Father Corrigian's sentence was later reduced to 7 years. He was defrocked by the Romanian Orthodox Church, and the 4 nuns were relieved of their duties. While some believe that Irina was suffering from mental illness, others, including Irina's brother, still insist that Irina was possessed by the devil, and that Father Corrigian was trying his best to save her. So, was Irina's final battle against the devil, or a mental illness, or a combination of both? I leave it to your own judgment.